Hello, YouTube Collective, and I am back today with another talk about astrology. Sort of to give you guys a little update on the astrology forecast, what's going on, and what transit I chose to look at and study on and think about this past week and just this week coming up in general. The transit hasn't happened yet. It will happen on Monday, which is tomorrow, the 17th of August. And it will be, I think, a transit that we've possibly been already feeling as it's been building up to this point for a while. And that is Mars, not opposing, Mars is squaring Neptune. That's right. So Mars has recently moved into the sign of Cancer on I believe it was the 11th of August. And in that time period, it was slowly but surely, within a day or so, moving into a square with the planet of Neptune in Aries, which is retrograde right now. So that's what I'm on here to talk about. I want to talk a little bit about my feelings around this transit, what I've been thinking, sort of the energy I see around this transit, and even, I don't know, just sort of like on a collective level of energy and media and what I'm watching and what I'm seeing and how I'm able to see these transits sort of play out in real time. So if you want to hear a little bit about my thoughts on that, please stick around as I'm going to go over those here in a bit. First, I want to give you just a little bit of information on when I will be back and sort of the schedule for the next video coming. So, of course, you know we are in the eclipse portal. If you watch my videos, I've already made a video on the total solar eclipse that we had in the sign of Leo, which is what we are sort of wrapping up from. And I can tell you right now, this week has been a wild ride with that eclipse. I don't know if you are out there and you are noticing things that's been going on. There were sort of things that were eclipsed in my area of the world and in my location that I was very surprised about and kind of just shocked to see some things that I feel like, you know, my attention was being called to, as, you know, we're just, what is it, about 4 days past the total solar eclipse in Leo. So I know I've had a chance to talk to some people, and you know, there were things eclipsed from their life. And so I definitely think we are in a very potent, energetic time. And so if you are noticing things and you would love to share, I would love to hear, please leave them in the comments. I sort of have this transit going on in an interesting area in my natal chart. So for me, it's sort of like a shocking revelation of things at first, or, you know, it just slowly, it's maybe have been, you know, going on, and it, you know, it takes something like a total solar eclipse to fully expose the light, especially a total solar eclipse in the sign of the sun, right? Of Leo, excuse me. But yeah, so now we are beyond that one, and we are moving into our first quarter square with the sun and the moon, and which is coming up this week. But before that, Mars is going to be squaring Neptune, as I mentioned before. And I will be back on here to talk about the partial lunar eclipse that we are going to be having in the sign of Pisces. And that is going to be coming up, friends. I think the eclipse is going to be on the 27th. And then I will be back sometime in that week to talk about it, probably next Monday, to talk about that. And then after that, I'm going to sort of be back on to do like my astrology forecast for the month of September. I can't believe we are already in the month of September almost, but we are halfway there and we are halfway through eclipse season. And so I will be back on here to talk about that, but I just wanted to give you sort of like a little update on when I will be back on and sort of what I will talk about during that time. But today, let's talk about Mars in Cancer at 3 degrees of Cancer, squaring Neptune in Aries at 3 degrees of Aries, shall we? Because not that I think this is that significant of a transit. I mean, Neptune, which we'll talk about, you know, in and of itself is like, I feel like a planet of mysticism, and it's sort of hidden, you know, it's sort of out there in the solar system somewhere, right? We can't see it with the naked eye. We definitely need technology in order to be able to see it, but it is among us, people, okay? It is out there in the atmosphere, and it is, what is that movie, you know, they're watching us or something? I don't know, but it's watching us. So I know it's out there. And yeah, so it's going to be in this squaring moment with the sign of Mars. And so, but before I talk about that, I want to tell you guys, or I want to tell you why I love to do cycles, you know, planets that are having important moments with other planets and focusing on cycles, because just like the moon cycles, I think it is, you know, is telling us a story, right? It's showing us sort of like an energy of that time, or an energy of something playing out, as I like to see in our own life or in the collective. And it really does have these check-in points, you know, with this energy, you know, something like Mars and Neptune cycles, or the sun and the moon cycles, or, you know, you name it, just any cycle between the planets, I think are so significant and really helps us to get even more so pulled in and tied into the energies that we are currently going through. And it helps us to make sense of it all, you know, instead of focusing narrowly on just one particular transit that's going on, you know, with like, say, maybe Venus is moving into a new sign, or Mercury is moving into a new sign. It really helps us to see how these planets are showing up with the other planets, and why it's significant. Why it's significant that Mars is moving into Cancer at this point in time, or, you know, Jupiter is moving into Leo at this point in time. And so I really do love cycles. And if you watch my videos, you will see that I will mostly talk about different cycles that I'm noticing that's happening between the planets, and what I am discovering from these archetypes, you know, and the energies and the significations of these energies touching down together. So I wanted to get that out of the way, just in case you're wondering, why do I only talk about these particular areas of astrology? So the check-in point right now, though, for Mars and Neptune. So Mars and Neptune came together. I'm going to give you some dates here, so I'll be looking up and down at the camera. But Mars and Neptune came together for a new cycle, or a seeding point, as I like to call it, back on April 13th of this year, 2026. So take yourself back there, you know. Which house is Aries for you, if you like to follow along with your natal chart as I'm speaking or talking, or you just have like a cognition of your own astrology natal chart. Where is this Aries house for you? Because this Aries house is definitely being highlighted right now. Or where is this Aries energy in your, you know, where was Aries when you were born? You know, what sign was Aries in? Was it in the moon? Was it in the sun or Mars? Even if you don't quite have a natal chart, you can always Google what sign was Mars in 1978 or 1983. Or what planet, I should say, not what sign, but what planet was Aries in, if it was even in a planet, but it's a really great way to kind of track things. And, we have so much access now to information that it's so easy to pretty much ask the internet anything and it'll tell you what was going on and a whole lot of other slew of information that you may have not asked for. But where is this Aries part of the chart for you? What house is Aries in right now? Because in April, it came together with Mars in Aries for a new seeding cycle, okay? As I've already mentioned, on Monday, August the 17th, it's reaching a new point in this cycle, right? So it's pretty, it's been just going, Mars has gone through many different signs since then. Of course, Neptune will be in Aries for a pretty long time. I think about 11 years. So you don't have to really worry about what Neptune's doing. But I think Mars is going to be bringing us back and shifting that energy, around a little bit to get that Neptune in your chart to sort of come alive, if you will. Neptune can be a very mystical planet just in and of itself, a planet around dreams and illusions. But being touched with or aspected with a planet like Mars, which is very active, not about the dream world at all, very much so about the physical reality, it's going to really show us sort of, what is going on with Neptune and what this Neptune area of your chart is playing out and showing about the energies around you, or even maybe personally as well. So Mars will be squaring, as I mentioned, is at a new cycle, a new point in the cycle. And Mars will be squaring Neptune for the first time since this cycle started. So that's a pretty big deal. Of course, I like to talk about the different cycles on here. Just, that first square, or as some like to call it, that opening square between Mars and Neptune, is a pretty significant point in the energy. And it's definitely going to be a time, I think, where we are able, if we haven't already been able to notice with the planet of Mars and the planet of Neptune, where we will see some tension arrive from, with a square. It's really meant to get us moving. It's really about action and drive and, sort of that, like, how bad do you want it sort of energy, I call it sort of totally testosterone based, Marsian energy with a square. And it's pretty powerful of a time. So that particular area for you, depending on what or whom this energy is around, is getting this tension right now. Some energy around that might be, as I just told you, but some of it could be tough, okay? It could be sensitive, and it can even be a critical time right now, okay? And if this has something to do with you, maybe you have an Aries placement, or maybe it's someone in your family that has a pretty significant Aries placement in their own natal chart, you are able to kind of witness this time as probably for them or for yourself a pretty tough time or a hard time, maybe even a little tension, and could be even pretty serious and critical. So back when the seeding point happened, right, when Mars and Neptune came together back in April, as I shared, the planet of Neptune was direct, okay? And Mars was in Aries, so it was in its domicile planet. And what that means is it was at home where Mars likes to be. So more than likely Mars was calling the shots, right? I mean, just really depending, but Mars was really in a good spot, back in April when this seeding point originally happened. And Neptune was direct, so it had a little bit more. I always look at a planet because now Neptune is retrograde, and it's been retrograde for a month or so. I always see the planets when they're retrograde, and this is just kind of my way of seeing it. It's sort of like disassociative, like they're there, but they're not really there because they're going back over something else. And so they're kind of disassociating from the here and now a little bit as time is continuing to go, and they might be still in that sign, or they are still in that sign. But they have sort of like this, I like to see it as like a disassociative quality to that particular planet. And so now Neptune is not direct anymore. It is retrograde. And, and Mars is not in Aries. It's not in its domicile anymore. It's in the sign of Cancer. And, in the sign of Cancer, Mars has a pretty difficult time. It's in astrology where Mars is considered in its fall. It's probably a time where the Marsian energy, if you will, in the atmosphere or just in the collective is having some difficulty right now. I like to mention, I know I'm going to get there, sort of what, the planet of Mars represents. Mars can represent our action steps, sort of, it has that risk-taking or daredevil quality to it, our drives towards, going after what we are actively pursuing. It is a malefic planet, and it can show where physical harm can be done as well. Mars is a very physical kind of representation of the malefics, whereas Saturn is, I feel like, more of a Saturn is like, it's almost like a slow, hard planet, a slow, things are falling apart, but it's slowly and it's suffering and it's kind of torturous, where Mars is very actively cutting things off and causing harm pretty fast. So what I wanted to share about the Mars energy at this time right now, it could be showing where Mars is having some difficulty, as Mars is in the sign of Cancer right now. Being, it's in basically the home, or the moon is what rules Cancer. So the moon obviously rules, the home of the family, the home of the self in some categories. And, the moon can be very symbolic of families of origin, or just this sort of like that birthing starting point, right? Where you come into existence with a family, and so having Mars there, which is a very active planet, as I just mentioned, a malefic planet, you can only imagine that usually when you bring that sort of energy into a place that's sensitive, where as the moon, where you want to maybe gather and collect and receive and nurture, and Mars being sort of the opposite of that, or sort of an aggressive energy of action, and not necessarily sensitive, it can cause quite a disruption around that particular sign and planet, or Mars being in Cancer, I should say. So that's sort of what we are going through right now, and what we are dealing with, as Mars is no longer domicile in Aries back in April, and has moved into the position of its fall, okay, in Cancer. So what does that mean, friends? Well, now retrograde. Neptune, on the other hand, which is in and of itself, in a lot of ways, is newly in Aries. It's just been this year where Neptune has come into Aries to stay, and will be staying for, as I mentioned earlier, like the next 11 years. So Neptune is, sort of, it's, I think, well, it was briefly in Aries in 2025, but it retrograded all the way back into Pisces. This time, Neptune is in Aries, and it won't go back into Pisces. It will just stay in Aries. And so I think, Neptune in Aries is finally starting to get its feel around, or we are even starting to get our feel around what this Neptune in Aries energy is probably going to feel like as it's going through its first retrograde in Aries. And it will move direct again. I can't remember. I want to say around October, or maybe later this year. It will move direct again in the sign of Aries still. It's not going back to Pisces. But, it's still pretty new. This is the first time where it will retrograde in the sign of Aries, meaning Neptune, and then go direct again in the sign of Aries. It won't go back anywhere else, but it will stay in this Aries energy. And so what does Neptune really highlight? When we think about the planet of Neptune, what is that like? Well, some have compared it to like a dream state, illusions. I know your dreams really can, and I don't know if this is just hype, but I definitely have a lot of interesting dreams depending on what's going on with Neptune. If Neptune is in a significant transit like it is right now with the planet of Mars, I've been having some pretty interesting dreams. So I don't know about you, but check your dreams. Try to think about your dreams, or if you've been having these like wild dreams. I mean, it is a square between Mars and Neptune. It's just, it can be a pretty interesting time. And sometimes you can even see these significations playing out in your dream state. Neptune has also been mentioned as the planet of illusions, the mystical world, the spiritual or psychic realm. It's been tied to high levels of creativity. And in a more shadowy manifestation of Neptune, it has also been tied to things like addiction and escapism. So, so that's a little bit about Neptune. And it is, as I mentioned before, in retrograde. And so it's sort of like, it's going back over another period of time that before it moved retrograde, when it was direct, I think it was like the end of May, like around May 27th, Neptune was, maybe you were working on something around that time, or there was some sort of creativity going on around that time, or something around that time, which is going to highlight now, with this square from Mars, dealing with, as I mentioned before, the family or something like that is, now starting to get that first hit of stimuli, of energy from that time. And, it's something is, having to bring about more of action in that, around that time from May, when the planet of Neptune was direct. So I am a firm believer that each transit, friends, is moving us into a period of time. Okay. I definitely believe there is no coincidences that after this transit with Mars in Cancer squaring Neptune, which is retrograde in Aries, I feel like, there's no coincidences right now with that, because, why do I say that? Well, on, what is it, the 19th, I think that's Wednesday, we reach the first quarter square from this seeding point of this total solar eclipse in Leo. Remember that we are going through. And so we will reach that first quarter square as Mars in Cancer squaring Neptune in Aries is also reaching this first quarter square in its cycle. So I definitely think there are no coincidences. And I think that, there's things that's pointing us to look at the areas of creation, the areas of where we are creating. The sun and the moon, they come together, and it's a seeding point. As I mentioned, the planets are coming together, they have a seeding point and they reach critical points. And we need all of these energies for something to actually sprout, right, to come into existence. So when you think about, like, wow, like a couple days, like right after this square between Mars and Neptune, we're going to have our first quarter square between the sun and the moon from this total solar eclipse energy that we just went through in this new moon phase of this time. So there's definitely a story that's unraveling. There's definitely a energy that has tension around it. I don't for one moment think that this is a moment where people are just all like, maybe I should just be at the beach because I have absolutely nothing to do. Like, no, friends, I feel like this time right now that we are in is very action driven. Okay. There are, like I said, there are important things unfolding. There are significant things that have to be worked on, that has to be figured out. Some things critical, this is a critical phase where these energies in our natal chart or in our collective is playing out right now. So just to kind of give you a highlight of the time, if you were wondering, this isn't just like any old time, and all of these planets and the signs that they're in, it's bringing in to a focal point our lives and how they all work together, how all the energies come and work together, and how the divine intelligence, shows us what's next, what's coming, where is the action part of this, is something up with it, so there's a lot here, I think, that we can really work on and look at. So some highlights, friends, let's get into some highlighted areas that I think are pretty significant. Okay. So one highlighted area, I think, is tension. We right now, as an individual, depending on where your natal chart is or where these energies are playing out in your own personal natal chart, or even just as a collective, we are going through some tension. Okay. There are tense moments. And I don't think it is, we aren't feeling this sort of individually, although that can be a factor where others are feeling it a little bit more than some. But I definitely feel as if we are all feeling a sense of tension, as these energies are very potent energies in creation. When we talk about the sun and the moon and Mars, and, we're talking about our very self, our very existence. So it can be pretty tense. Relational themes perhaps are coming up right now for most, if not all, right? Emotions are taking on perhaps more of a not so good energy, mysteries around family matters, breaking off from things and people. These are some of the tension highlights I think I was able to kind of sift from this energy. The dream or the illusion versus the reality and the truth, the self, the truth of self, sorry. Mars forces might be showing us right about now what things can look like when they are being birthed from a good place or an investment of security and stability. Okay. So wait, hang on. Let me read that again. So Mars forces might be showing us right about now what things can look like when they are not, I'm sorry about that, when they are not being birthed from a good place. Okay. When they are not invested in the right way, and the instability, that kind of comes from that. So I think that's, kind of what we are seeing. I know I definitely, looking at these energies, was like, this can be a time where we're really having to look at the true self and sort of what we have invested in, what we have tried to create and bring into existence, in this birthing process, and sort of what it takes, the reality versus the illusion of things, right? So also the Marsian energy right now might appear as if it's getting weaker or slower. So think about that for yourself. Mars is, as I mentioned before, it's in Cancer. Okay. It's in the sign where it is considered to be sad or even depressed, maybe struggling a little bit more with argumentative stances or quarrelsome stances, which, when you think about that just as in a whole, it sort of makes things slower in life. It slows down your actions. It slows down perhaps maybe what Mars wants to signify, right? You can't really get to, if this was a competition, the goalie, right? It's something is slowing this down. There's something in the way that is slowing this down. And so we can kind of feel like that in this time with Mars being in its more depressed energy in Cancer, as, maybe Mars is having to take time and meet needs of the family or something else that needs life poured into it, right? So checking in on what Mars is trying to bring forth right now in this area of your natal chart is crucial, because maybe back in April when Mars and Neptune were together and Mars was domicile and ready to go, it was in Aries, that hot, fiery, sometimes impulsive sign of Aries. And it's just like, let's do it. Let's go. It's been a switch. It's been a change as Mars have moved into a bit of a slower time, a bit of a time where it can't just focus solely on this adrenaline of bringing forth this action, right? So maybe at this first quarter square time, or as I mentioned, the opening square, as some like to call it, Mars is starting to realize there has to be some sort of rebirth, right? Or healing that has to take place around relationships, I think, family, right? Pleasure. There has to be almost sort of like a reconciliation that is being needed, in maybe even required, okay, to bring about the right or even more stabilizing energy. Something has to be, there has to be some sort of looking at a sense of bringing things back together, reconciling things, okay, unifying things the right way in order to help Mars out, as it's in a pretty tough spot right now. In order for things in our lives like love and good fortune and pleasure to be achieved, it has to be in the right place, friends. It has to have the right energy. And, I would even go as far as to say, not an energy that is sort of produced from depression and anxiety and stress, right? In order for it to create what it is that we would like it to bring about, right? So a pressure around the self versus the other is up for evaluation, I think, pretty soon. And it can feel detrimental, I think, if the right balance isn't achieved. As I mentioned earlier, Mars can be a critical time as well, or Mars squaring a planet can be a very critical time, a very sensitive time during a first quarter square. And, if things aren't handled the right way or brought into the right balance or reconciled, or, all the things that the benefics want to offer, to perhaps the energy that's very difficult, it can be a detrimental time, where, I hate to say it, but there are things that are cut off, there are things that are lost, there are things that are even gone for good. So we have to really look at this time, I think, with a seriousness and a sensitive eye, with Mars in Cancer squaring Neptune in Aries, as a time where we are, we're not in dream state. We have to really look at the clarity, to see clearly what it is we're working with, so that something, very detrimental won't come from this. And I think ultimately, not all can be saved, right? Some things that are detrimental will come from this. But I think, we do get a time right now, friends, to check in with that area in our charts or in that area in our life, and, see how that's going, The ultimate struggle around getting one's needs met, and the hows and the wins are definitely up for debate right now. I have needs, you have needs, we have needs. When do we get these needs met? How do we get these needs met? I think is something crucial that can play out with this time. I would advise the collective to be weary of frustration, emotionally volatile energy towards yourself and or your family. Okay. During this transit, we're still sort of in this building up, phase. This is like the building up to and sort of the aftermath of that seeding point of Mars and Neptune coming together. So, we are sort of, here we are now where we get a first check-in, a checkpoint with this square of, what has ensued from this, right? I would even say, since perhaps Mars went into Cancer on August 11th, I believe, we were able to see sort of, how is this going to go? Am I going to have to cut it all off? Am I going to have to is it done? Because around that time, Mars in Cancer was already moving into a square with Neptune in Aries. So again, the illusion versus the reality, right? So ultimately, friends, I believe that there has to be a truth uncovered. There will be a truth that's uncovered. There have already been a truth, okay, that's uncovered, that is fighting or have fought to come to life, all right? That's fought to present itself, and now it's here. And there's the aftermath may not be as pleasant, perhaps, as we would like it to be, but we can't go back. What do we do with it now? We have to face it, right? We can't stay wrapped up in the illusion of it, because now it's fully, not as I feel like upon us as it will be when these two planets make an opposition, but we can definitely see what has ensued from that first seeding point of Mars and Neptune coming together back in April. Okay. So again, I would think, families of origin, things that we have put in a lot of time and energy, things that we are birthing, we have actively tried to birth or building, are definitely up for evaluation right now at this squaring time. So with wrapping up, I would like to say maybe taking a deeper look at the foundation, of whatever it is, wherever this is happening at in your natal chart. We all have an Aries area in our life. We all have a Cancer area in our life. And I think taking a deeper look at the foundation between these energies in our natal chart and how they are playing out, how they are working out for us or around that area of our life. It may not be for us. As I mentioned, it could be friends, it could be families, it could be a career, it could be other things that is playing out in our lives that is very much so inclusive of us, because we are feeling the aftermath, or we are feeling the energy around it, as we usually always do, with being tied to a collective, right? So asking ourselves the very real questions, right? What is real? What is stable? And what adds to a good life, right? What adds to a good foundation in order to make whatever it is I am creating or birthing? You think of Cancer, you think of Aries. Aries deals so much with the self that I am bringing into existence. What does it take to give this the nurturing and the help that it needs, even though it might be going through a very real time of loss right now, and a sense of damage, if it can, or if there's something you can do around it to repair it, or to save it, or to spring into action, as a first quarter square wants to do. How do I do that, right? Where can I do that? So asking ourselves those very, very real questions, friends, okay? And that's what I wanted to share. This has been how I have worked with this energy this week and sort of seen it play out in my own area. For me, this has been a very interesting time. Just, it's happening a lot all around many different areas in my natal chart, as it usually does in most natal charts. But it has helped to have sort of like a grounding framework of what I can do now, how I can spring into action, and how I can show up in a more authentic version of nurturing whatever needs to be nurtured into to progression. So that's what I want to share, friends. And thank you if you stayed this long. I did not mean for it to be this long, but I definitely wanted to just say, I know we are in some very, very real times right now in the collective and in the astrology. And I send blessings, and I send warm just hope and whatever it may be, that feelings of positivity, as I know that everybody is going through many different circumstances in their lives right now. And it may seem very difficult, for a lot, and just things that you can't repair. And I understand that. And I know that that is not easy. And so I definitely send a warm and positive energy on hope and reformation and rebuilding. So that's about it. And I will be back, as I mentioned, with another video, perhaps talking a little bit about this, what did I say? I think the partial lunar eclipse we have coming in the sign of Pisces. So until then, take care, and I will see you in a week. Bye.